15.
"20 years ago, there were 501 homeless organizations in London alone. And not one of them gave the homeless the opportunity of making their own money. Not one of them said, here you are, you're a homeless person, you're using drugs, you are taking a lot of drink into you, you're doing all sorts of scummy things. Sorry, excuse me. I have to take this out. Largely because my 3-year-old son, sitting on my lap a few years ago, he's now 5, sorry, he's 6, and he went, boom, and knocked my tooth out, so that's it. Anyway, what a bastard. Never have children when you're in your late 50s. Of course, I did start when I was 19, so anyway. So what you had was a conspiracy against the poor and against the homeless. Because what was actually going on was that these 501 homeless organizations gave you everything from a place to sleep to a condom to slip on your penis. The unfortunate thing is they didn't supply the women to go with that. And I often complain that if you go along to Christ's at Christmas and you get condoms, then there should be women laid on. As most of the vendors, 95% of them were, the homeless were geezers. Anyway, so in 1991, Gordon Roddick, who didn't do an awful lot other than give me £500,000 to start the big issue. In fact, I don't think that was enough. He had previously been in New York in July 1990, and he had met this rather large black guy coming towards him, and the guy said to him, "Excuse me, brother, would you like to buy a copy of my street paper?" And Gordon said, yeah, because Gordon thought he was going to be mugged by this wardrobe walking towards him. And, you know, we're all prejudiced. You see a big black guy coming towards you, and he's going to rob you. So Gordon, being a white middle-class liberal, thought this guy was going to tear his pocket open. Anyway, the guy said, "Would you like to buy a copy of the street paper?" And Gordon said, "Yes." "How much is it?" He said, "It's $1. So he gave him the $1. He says, "How does it work?" He says, "Well, I buy it for 50 cents and I sell it for $1, so I make 50 cents. He says, "Why do you do this?" He says, "Well, I'm a 54-year-old black guy. I come from Brownsville, where Tyson comes from. Anybody who comes from Brownsville doesn't get out of Brownsville without some kind of record. And I've been in and out of the penitentiary system for like 25, 30 years, and I got out at 54, and I thought, sod this for a game of soldiers. So what I'm going to do is go off somewhere and try and get some work. But I'm a 54-year-old black guy from Brownsville who is not going to get a job from anybody because I've just come out of the penitentiary." And then I met some people selling a paper, and they said, "Well, you know, why don't you sell the paper, make money, prevent yourself from becoming homeless?" So Gordon went, "Wow! Wouldn't that be wonderful?" Because in 1991, there were thousands of homeless people sleeping in the doorways of the West End of London, along the Aldwych. It was a kind of linear dormitory. And the police were having to be involved in, you know, the Daily Mail was going on about, "Oh, those terrible people, you know, it's frightening away the Japanese tourists," and all sorts of shit like that. So therefore, a load of people got very hyperventilated about this. So there was a feeling that what you needed to do was do something about these homeless people, who, as we know, had been produced by Margaret Thatcher over the previous 5 or 6 years, and also added to by Mr. John Major. Anyway, the long and the short of it, Gordon then got the Body Shop Foundation. Gordon Roddick was the founder of the Body Shop with his wife Anita. And they got the Body Shop Foundation to do a feasibility study. And I don't know if you know about feasibility studies, but feasibility studies are normally carried out by people who know fuck all about anything. And what they do is they go and talk to people who know fuck all about anything. And what they do is, between them, they come to some form of, conclusion. And then it costs you 50,000 quid or something like this. Anyway, the foundation of the Body Shop found out that every homeless organization, with the exception of one, which was Centrepoint, thought that the idea of starting a street paper in London was an incredibly ridiculous thing to do. Because what would happen is you would give the homeless the chance of buying their own drugs and buying their own drinks. Wouldn't that be awful? Condemnation from on high. You give money to people and they use it against themselves and they end up in prison. The unfortunate thing was that all the homeless organizations, of which there were 501, as I mentioned earlier, all knew that the people they were working with were stuffing stuff into their arms and up their arses or wherever else you put drugs, and were knocking it back big time. So they knew that. But they chose to look the other way because they didn't want to be a part of this thing. So Johnny Bird comes along in 1991. I don't know if you remember, there was a war with what's his name? He's dead now. The geezer they found in a hole. What's his name? Saddam Hussein. God bless him. God bless him. Someone's got to live in a hole. There was a war, and that was over. I was a printer. I was running a small printing company, printing stuff for people who weren't paying me. And because I was dealing with the middle classes, the Arts Council, all those kind of people. Yes, I'll pay you sometime. Anyway, so what was happening, I was up shit creek without the proverbial means of propulsion. Gordon came to me and said, look, would you like to start a street paper? I had met Gordon 20 years before as a young 21-year-old who decided to go and live in Scotland for a while because the police in London were after me. I slept rough for a while and was doing all sorts of things. I earned my living down Rose Street, which had all these antique shops. My speciality for making my way through life was to go at the middle of the night and throw a brick through the window and steal antique pistols and all sorts of stuff like that. So anyway, that's when I met Gordon, 20 years before. 20 years later, 25 years later, he reconnects with me. And he says, I love this idea of a street paper. Come in, please. Oh, sorry. I thought it was a paying member. It's not, sir. I'll tell you a joke in a minute. Do you want to hear a Ken Dodd joke? Anyway, this is a Ken Dodd joke. You fucking told me. Anyway, Ken Dodd. There's a guy who runs into a shop and he says, "Excuse me." He says, "Where's the camouflage jackets?" And the bloke says, "They're good, aren't they?" I interviewed Ken Dodd, who's like me, likes to talk forever. I mean, 15 minutes is ridiculous. They should have just cut all those other people, and I could spoke for an hour and a quarter, and threw the brick. Anyway, I gave him a joke. Did you hear that they're doing a Liverpool version of Silence of the Lambs? It's called Shut Up Yous. Anyway, Gordon and I, he was this posh geezer. He was posh. I mean, he was a liberal posh, money. He didn't have money when I met him because he could only afford 5 or 6 pints of heavy a night. But then when I re-met him, he was a shed load of money. Oh, God above, when I re-met him, he had a shed load of money. And you know You know that when you come from poverty, you have to keep these principles. And the first principle is if you meet somebody with money, stick to them. I was born around the corner. I was born into the most abject poverty, unbelievable. Violence, scumbaggery round the corner, London Irish, rubbish, where I was learnt to, by my parents, to hate blacks, Jews, and English people. I still haven't made my mind up about the English, but, you know, I'm all right with the Jews and the blacks. They're some of my best friends, not Jewish and black. Anyway, but we'll go on about that later. But the point was, Gordon Roddick was absolutely obsessed with this idea of doing a street paper. And what I wanted to do was start some literary magazine where I didn't have to meet the people I came from. Because I'm an ex-offender, I'm an ex-homeless person, ex-rough sleeper. I'm trying to get it all in 15 minutes so you don't have to buy my book. Because I ain't got one. Anyway. Economy. But the long and the short of it was, I was ideal. I was from central casting. I was not the person who would be sympathetic towards the homeless. Do you know I meet so many people who are sympathetic towards the poor? People come into my office and they say, I'm really sympathetic about the poor. And I say, fuck off. Get out. Get out. Because you know the world extends poverty by sympathy. You know, the more you feel sorry for the homeless, the longer they remain. That reminds me, how does Mr. Whippy go to the toilet? I did that once at Prince Charles's birthday party, and Stephen Fry didn't laugh at it. But there you are. That's Stephen Fry. So anyway, the point is that what we did was in 1991, the 11th of September, as you know, Osama is not with us anymore. Osama, is it? Osama? We've got Obama, but we haven't got Osama. Now, I read in the, sorry, I have to object here. I read in the Daily Mail that he was a coward to the end. I think whatever you say about Osama bin Laden, he was not a coward. He was a very brave man who did stuff that we didn't like him doing. But he certainly wasn't a coward. But that's just an aside, anyway. Anyway, so we looked at this idea of starting a street paper. And what we wanted to do was give the homeless the chance of making their own money so that if they wanted to put it down their throats or in their arms, they didn't have to rob your granny. Isn't that wonderful? And you know what? 20 years later, how long have I got? I mean, not... She says 3 minutes and puts 2 fingers up. So what are you? Are you a dyslexic? 2.5 minutes. God bless you. Do you want another joke? I won't tell you. Anyway, so what we did was we decriminalized the homeless. 20 years later, we bring the homeless to the marketplace like the rest of us. Every one of you is controlled by a marketplace. And what we normally do is we take the poor, who are them, they're them and we're us. I used to be them, but now I'm posh, I'm us. You didn't realize I was posh, did you? But I'm posh. Middle class, proud of it. And what we do is we have them over there and we remain over here. And virtually every homeless organization was totally and utterly transfixed with the idea of giving people something for nothing. And Johnny Bird came along and said, fuck this for a game of soldiers. If you want to get somebody out of poverty, bring them to the marketplace where you live and where you die. Why can't they be like us? Why can't we end the tyranny of poverty so that the poor themselves can become us? Social mobility. Unfortunately, this is a real problem because most people still buy into the idea that the poor are somebody to look upon. And Mr. Bragg is here tonight talking about the Bible. In the Bible it says, I don't know if it's true actually, because he's made me think, well, what is the Bible? Is it Tyndall's or is it somebody else's? In the Bible it says, "'Tis better to give than to receive." I think that's Charlton Heston, isn't it? It is better to give than to receive. We know that. You know why? Because the person who gives has cleaner underwear than the person who receives. The person who gives, wonderfully gives, has longer holidays and a car and a nice house. And the person who receives gets what you don't want. And until we break that terrible ghettoization between us and them, we're fucked. And the reason I, Johnny Bird, am still doing this, even though I'm an antique gentleman of 65, is because I was one of them and I've become us. And I want all of you to be out there fighting to convert them to us. Thank you very much. God bless you.